The Romulans thought they could destroy Earth. Those alien fucks were about to learn a deadly lesson they'd never forget. Stephen Kennedy slumped in a shadowy booth, the dim lights of the seedy bar barely illuminating his whiskey glass. He gulped the drink, embracing the burn. It helped dull the screams still echoing in his mind, the screams of his men as Romulans butchered them in that botched raid. "Easy," the figure murmured, his face obscured. "I'm a friend." "I don't have friends," Stephen growled. The figure leaned in. "The Romulans are building a weapon on their moon." Stephen scoffed. "Why should I care? I'm out of the fight." "They're targeting Earth first. I'm Romulan, but I want to stop them." The figure slid a data chip across the table. "All the proof you need. I'm begging you, help me." Stephen sat in silence as the figure retreated into the shadows. He plugged the chip into his ARM computer. Schematics flooded the screen, test footage, a massive planet-killing weapon, Romulans gloating over Earth's image. Stephen's fists clenched. This was no longer about just him or his grief. If he didn't act soon, there may not be an Earth left to defend. He had to stop them, but he couldn't do it alone. A fire reignited in Stephen's soul, a fierce determination to stop the Romulans' insidious plot at any cost. He set out to assemble a team, a group of misfits and outcasts who could pull off the impossible. His first stop was a ramshackle workshop on the outskirts of a frontier colony. Jack Reeves, a brilliant engineer, had been living as a hermit since a bitter falling out with the military brass. Stephen stepped inside the cluttered space, picking his way through discarded machine parts. "Jack," Stephen called out, "it's me." "I need your help, Jack. The Romulans, and they're building something big, something that could wipe out Earth." Jack scoffed. "And why should I care? The military cast me aside like garbage?" Stephen sighed. "I know you got a raw deal, Jack, but this is bigger than that, bigger than all of us, and I can make it worth your while." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I'm listening." After some tense negotiation, Jack agreed to join the mission, enticed by the promise of a hefty payday and the chance to stick it to the establishment. Next on Stephen's list was Finn Makarov, a notorious hacker who Stephen had once saved from a life sentence in a brutal Martian prison colony. He found Finn in a seedy bar, hunched over a computer. Finn looked up surprised. "Stephen, I thought I'd never see you again. What's this about?" Stephen explained the situation, the dire threat posed by the Romulans. Finn listened intently, his expression growing serious. "I owe you everything, Stephen," Finn said. "If you need me, I'm there, no questions asked." The final piece of the puzzle was Liam O'Connor, a pilot with an uncanny ability to slip in and out of heavily guarded locations undetected. Stephen tracked him down to a small spaceport, where Liam was tinkering with his ship. "Liam," Stephen called out, "and got a job for you. The biggest one yet." Liam looked up, a glint in his eye. "I'm always up for a challenge. What's the target?" "The Romulans' moon base. We need to get in, sabotage their weapon, and get out alive." Liam grinned. "Sounds like my kind of party. Count me in." With his team assembled, Stephen laid out the plan. They would infiltrate the moon base, each man using his unique skills to overcome the formidable defenses. Once inside, they would locate the weapon and destroy it, crippling the Romulans' ability to threaten Earth. As they pored over schematics and discussed tactics, an uneasy tension filled the room. The odds were stacked against them, the chances of success slim, but the alternative, the annihilation of their homeworld, was too horrific to contemplate. Just as they were finalizing their preparations, a message from Stephen's mysterious Romulan contact, Juno, flashed across the screen. The Romulans had accelerated their timeline. The weapon would be operational in mere days. The team exchanged grim looks. There was no more time to waste, no margin for error. They had to act now before it was too late. As they boarded Liam's ship and set course for the Romulan moon, each man grappled with his own fears and doubts, but one thought united them all. Failure was not an option. The fate of Earth and countless other worlds hung in the balance. As Liam guided their unmarked shuttle into the docking bay, using the stolen access codes, the team exchanged tense glances. This was it, the point of no return. The bay was empty, save for a few dilapidated cargo ships. Stephen led the way as they crept into the dimly lit corridors of the Romulan base, their boots echoing softly on the metal floor. An eerie silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant hum of machinery. Finn located a data terminal and jacked in, his fingers flying across the keys. After a few tense minutes, he looked up, a grim expression on his face. "Got a map of the base," he said, projecting a hologram. "The weapon is deep in the core, but there's a problem. Security system, way more advanced than Juno's intel suggested. I can try to hack it, but—" Finn trailed off, shaking his head. Stephen understood the implication. They were flying blind, walking into the unknown. They pressed on, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with Finn's map as their guide. The deeper they went, the more Stephen's instincts screamed at him that something was wrong. It was too quiet, too easy. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a shimmering force field blocking their path. Finn cursed under his breath, pulling out his hacking tools. "Stand back," he muttered, setting to work on the field's control panel. Minutes ticked by as Finn worked, sweat beading on his brow. Just as Stephen was about to suggest they find another route, the force field flickered and died. Finn grinned triumphantly, but his smile faded as alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, bathing the corridors in an ominous glow. "Shit," Liam hissed. "They know we're here." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a squad of Romulan guards rounded the corner, disruptor rifles raised. Stephen and his team dove for cover as the guards opened fire, green bolts of energy sizzling through the air. Stephen returned fire, his blaster finding its mark. One guard fell, then another. But they kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Liam cried out in pain as a disruptor bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He slumped against the wall, his face pale. Stephen gritted his teeth, firing off another volley of shots. They had to end this, and fast. With a final push, they managed to overpower the remaining guards, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. But the victory was short-lived. Liam was badly wounded, his shoulder a mess of charred flesh. They had to get him medical attention, but there was no turning back now. With Finn supporting Liam, they pushed deeper into the base, following the map to the weapons chamber. Each step was agony for Liam, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. Finally they reached the chamber, a cavernous room dominated by a massive, pulsing machine. Jack set to work on the device, his hands a blur as he rewired circuits and rerouted power. Stephen and Finn took up defensive positions, watching the entrances for any sign of Romulan reinforcements. They came in waves, each more determined than the last. Stephen's blaster grew hot in his hands as he fired shot after shot, the pile of Romulan bodies growing at his feet. Finn, too, fought with a desperate ferocity, but Stephen could see the fear in his eyes. They were running out of time and ammunition. Just as Jack let out a triumphant shout, signaling his success, a Romulan grenade arced through the air, landing at his feet. The blast threw him across the room like a rag doll, his body slamming into the far wall with a sickening crunch. Now, with Liam wounded and Jack unconscious, it fell to Stephen and Finn to carry their fallen comrades to safety. Alarms blared and warning lights flashed. The sabotaged weapon was going critical, ready to unleash a catastrophic meltdown. They had minutes, maybe less, to escape the base before it was consumed in a fiery inferno. With Romulan forces still hot on their heels, Stephen hoisted Jack over his shoulder while Finn supported Liam. Together, they began the arduous journey back to their shuttle, fighting for every inch, every second. The base shuddered around them, the first tremors of the impending disaster. Pipes burst, spraying scalding steam. Electrical panels exploded in showers of sparks. The very walls seemed to groan under the strain, threatening to collapse at any moment. But still they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that to stop now would mean certain death, not just for them, but for countless worlds. Earth, their home, hung in the balance, its fate resting squarely on their battered shoulders. Through smoke and fire, blood and sweat, Stephen and his team fought their way back to the docking bay. A trail of Romulan bodies marking their passage, they stumbled into their shuttle, sealing the hatch just as the first explosions began to rip through the base. Liam, barely conscious, fell into the pilot's seat, his hands shaking as they danced across the controls. The shuttle lurched forward, engines straining as it tore free of the docking clamps. Behind them, the Romulan base bloomed into a fiery ball of destruction, the shockwave buffeting their tiny craft. As they limped through space, nursing their wounds and tending to their fallen brothers, a somber realization settled over the team. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Romulans would not take this defeat lightly. Retribution would come, swift and terrible. The shuttle sailed on through the void, a tiny spark of hope in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space. As the base shuddered and crumbled around them, Stephen and his battered team fought their way through the chaos. Explosions rocked the corridors, sending showers of sparks and debris raining down upon them. The ominous groans of buckling metal echoed through the halls, a constant reminder of the impending destruction. Romulan soldiers, their once disciplined ranks now consumed by panic, turned on each other in a desperate bid to escape the doomed facility. Disruptor blasts lit up the smoke-filled corridors as the soldiers fought amongst themselves, their loyalty to the Empire forgotten in the face of their own survival. Stephen, Finn and Liam navigated the pandemonium, carrying the unconscious form of Jack between them. Their path to the hangar bay was blocked at every turn by collapsed bulkheads and raging fires, the heat searing their lungs with each labored breath. Time was running out. With each passing second, the base inched closer to total annihilation. In a moment of desperation, Stephen made a split-second decision. "The prison block," he shouted over the din of the collapsing base. "It's our only chance." Finn and Liam exchanged uncertain glances, but they trusted Stephen's instincts. They hurried through the twisting corridors, the eerie, flickering light of the emergency lamps casting long shadows on the walls. As they entered the abandoned prison block, a chill ran down Stephen's spine. The cells were dimly lit, the air heavy with the stench of despair and suffering. Suddenly, a movement caught Stephen's eye. A gaunt figure, more spectre than man, pressed against the bars of a cell, his eyes wide with terror and desperation. Stephen approached cautiously, his hand tightening on his blaster. But as he drew closer, the prisoner's words reached his ears, a desperate plea for mercy. In that moment, Stephen saw not a Romulan enemy, but a fellow being, broken and tormented by the cruelty of his own kind. With a heavy heart, Stephen made a choice. He could not leave this man to die, not when he had the power to save him. He fired his blaster, the lock on the cell door shattering under the impact. "I am Tharox," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I owe you my life. Let me help you escape this place." Stephen hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks, but time was a luxury they could not afford. With a curt nod, he gestured for Tharox to lead the way. The Romulan prisoner navigated the labyrinthine corridors with a surety born of desperation. He led them through twisting passages and hidden doorways, bypassing the worst of the destruction. "There," he said, his voice urgent. "That is your way out." Stephen and his team rushed to the shuttle, Finn and Liam hauling Jack's limp form up the ramp. Stephen paused at the entrance, turning back to Tharox. "Come with us," he offered, surprising himself with the words. "You don't have to die here." Tharox shook his head, a sad smile playing across his lips. "My place is here among the ashes of my people's folly. Go and live to fight another day." With a final nod of thanks, Stephen boarded the shuttle, the ramp hissing shut behind him. Liam, his face pale with pain, slid into the pilot's seat, his fingers dancing across the controls. The shuttle roared to life, rising from the hangar floor on a pillar of flame. As they hurtled away from the dying base, Stephen watched through the view screen as the moon below them erupted in a blinding flash of light. The planet-killer weapon, the Romulans' greatest horror, consumed itself in a cataclysmic explosion, taking countless lives with it. The shockwave buffeted the tiny shuttle, but Liam held it steady, guiding them through the debris field and into the safety of open space. As the adrenaline began to fade, the weight of their actions settled upon the battered team like a shroud. They had struck a blow against the Romulan Empire, but at what cost? The scars they bore, both physical and mental, would linger long after the last echoes of the explosion faded. Finn, tending to Liam's wounded shoulder, looked up at Stephen, his eyes haunted. As the battered shuttle limped through the void of space, the weight of their ordeal hung heavy in the air. Stephen sat hunched in his seat, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen as Eros Station grew larger with each passing second. Beside him, Liam lay stretched out on a makeshift cot, his face ashen and slick with sweat. Finn knelt at his side, applying pressure to the wound in a desperate attempt to stem the bleeding. "He's not looking good, Stephen," Finn said, his voice strained. "We need to get him to a proper medical facility, and fast." Stephen nodded, his jaw clenched tight. He glanced over at Jack, who sat in the corner, his head in his hands. The engineer had regained consciousness shortly after their escape, but the haunted look in his eyes spoke volumes about the horrors he had witnessed. And then there was Therox. The Romulan prisoner sat apart from the others, his gaze distant and inscrutable. Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the gaunt figure than met the eye. As they approached the station, a sense of unease began to creep over the group. The once bustling hub was eerily quiet, its docking bays empty and its lights dimmed. "Something's not right," Stephen muttered, as Liam guided the shuttle into the hangar. The moment they stepped out onto the station's deck, the air itself seemed to press in around them, heavy with an unnatural stillness. The usual hum of activity was conspicuously absent, replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the soft hiss of the shuttle's cooling engines. "Where is everyone?" Finn whispered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Stephen shook his head, a cold knot of dread forming in the pit of his stomach. "I don't know, but we need to get Liam to the medbay now." They made their way through the station's corridors, their footsteps ringing out with an eerie clarity. Shops stood empty, their shelves bare and their doors hanging open. The once vibrant heart of the station had become a ghost town. When they reached the medical bay, they found it in a state of disarray. Equipment lay scattered across the floor, and the beds were empty, their sheets rumpled and stained. There was no sign of the doctors or nurses who should have been on duty. "What the hell happened here?" Jack muttered, his voice thick with trepidation. Finn helped Liam onto one of the beds, then began to rummage through the cabinets in search of supplies. Stephen and Jack spread out, searching for any clues as to the whereabouts of the station's inhabitants. It was Jack who found the logs. A series of video recordings, each more disturbing than the last. They spoke of a strange affliction that had swept through the station like wildfire, causing those infected to lash out with a savage, mindless violence. "It started with the Andorians," a haggard-looking doctor said, his eyes haunted. "They complained of headaches, fatigue. We thought it was just a simple virus. But then they started to change." The log cut to footage of the infected, their bodies twisted and contorted, their eyes blazing with an inhuman hunger. They tore through the station like a pack of rabid animals, attacking anyone in their path. "We tried to contain it," the doctor continued, his voice breaking. "But it was too late, it spread too fast, and now I fear we are all doomed." The final log ended abruptly, the doctor's screams echoing through the empty room. Stephen and Jack exchanged a look of horror, the full weight of their situation crashing down upon them. "We need to get out of here," Stephen said, his voice tight with urgency. "Now." They raced back to the medbay, where Finn was just finishing up with Liam's wound. The pilot was conscious now, his face pale but determined. "What's going on?" he asked, struggling to sit up. "We're leaving," Stephen said, helping him to his feet. "This place isn't safe." They made their way back to the hangar, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they rounded the final corner, they came face to face with a sight that stopped them dead in their tracks. A horde of infected individuals, their bodies twisted and deformed, their eyes blazing with a ravenous hunger. They surged forward, a wave of gnashing teeth and grasping claws. Stephen and his team opened fire, their weapons tearing through the ranks of the infected, but for everyone they cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. "Fall back!" Stephen shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. They fought their way through the station's corridors, the infected hot on their heels. The air was thick with the stench of blood and decay, and the walls echoed with the screams of the damned. As they neared the shuttle, a sickening realization began to dawn on them. The experiments they had discovered on the Romulan base, the twisted abominations they had seen in those tanks, this was their handiwork. The Romulans had unleashed something far more sinister than a mere planet killer. They had created a plague, a living weapon designed to consume and destroy all in its path, and now it was loose on Eros Station, and perhaps beyond. With a final burst of desperate energy, they reached the shuttle, piling inside and slamming the hatch shut behind them. Liam, his face ashen and his hands shaking, coaxed the engines to life. As they rocketed away from the station, the full horror of what they had witnessed began to sink in. The Romulan experiments had not just threatened Earth, they had unleashed a nightmare upon the galaxy itself. And now it fell to Stephen and his battered, broken team to find a way to stop it, before it consumed everything in its path. Stephen's blaster fire ripped through the infected horde, bodies thudding to the deck. Finn dragged Liam into the shuttle as Jack sprayed suppressing shots. Stephen smashed the hatch controls and dove inside as claws scraped the closing door. Liam slumped against the wall, his face pale, uniform soaked in blood. Finn ripped open a medkit and sprayed sealant on the oozing wound. Through the view screen, the station receded, a diseased hellscape. Hordes of infected figures swarmed over the hull, tearing into each other in a frenzy of bloodlust. Fires raged across ruptured decks, venting atmosphere and debris. It was no longer a place for the living, just a monument to horror, a grave for thousands. Stephen turned to the Romulan prisoner, Therox, eyes hard. "Explain," he growled. "Now." Finn looked up from where he worked on Liam. "Genocide, that was your plan?" "So yes, but it changed, evolved, started infecting Romulans, twisting us, everything it touched." Therox shuddered. "There is no controlling it now." Stephen paced the small confines of the shuttle. The weapon was out, spreading. If Eros Station had fallen so quickly... He glanced at Liam, slumped and delirious. The wounds from their battle took on a more sinister cast. If he was infected... "What do we do?" Stephen asked, dreading the answer he already knew. Therox met his gaze. "There is no cure, only containment. You cannot allow it to spread." Stephen looked at his crew, at Liam. His gut clenched. He knew what had to be done, but to turn on one of their own. "We'll find another way," Finn said, desperation tinging his voice. "There has to be—" Liam shook his head. "You know there isn't. Please, while I'm still me." The weight of command settled heavily on Stephen's shoulders, the safety of his crew, of the galaxy, against the life of a friend. There was no other choice. He met Liam's fevered gaze and nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Liam reached out a trembling hand. Stephen clasped it tightly. A final moment of connection, of brotherhood before the end. Then he reached for his blaster, the metal cold against his palm. The shuttle hummed around them, carrying them through the void, as Stephen steeled himself for what must be done. The nightmare was only just beginning. The heavy weight of command crushed Stephen's soul. With Liam convulsing on the cot, sweat slicking his brow, the virus ravaging his body, Stephen made the gut-wrenching call. "Put him under," he said to Finn, his voice cracking. "Medically induced coma, it might slow the spread." Finn nodded grimly, prepping the drugs with trembling hands. He injected Liam, watching as his thrashing stilled, his breathing evening out. But the fever still burned hot. The infection raged on beneath the surface. It's a stopgap, Finn said hollowly. We need a cure, or he'll— I know a man, Tharox interjected. Dr. Zarek, a Romulan scientist. He was working on a counter-agent before he fled the Empire. Stephen rounded on him, eyes flashing. And you're just mentioning this now? Tharox held up his hands. He's well hidden, paranoid. But I have the coordinates to his facility, a remote planet. It's our best shot. Stephen wrestled with his options. Trust a Romulan traitor. Pin their hopes on a rogue scientist. But Liam's shallow breathing filled the shuttle, a reminder of how little choice they had. Set a course, Stephen said grimly. Let's hope your doctor friend is feeling hospitable. The shuttle knifed through the void, hurtling toward a distant world. A barren, lifeless rock pockmarked with craters. The perfect place to hide, to conduct unspeakable research. They set down on a cracked plateau, the shuttle's landing gear sinking into the brittle crust. The facility loomed before them, a squat bunker hewn from the planet's dark stone. No lights shone from within, no signs of life, just an eerie sepulchral stillness. Stephen and Finn flanked the entrance, weapons drawn. Tharox punched in an access code with shaking fingers. The door groaned open, revealing a yawning abyss of shadow. They crept inside, flashlight beams slicing through the gloom. Overturned furniture, shattered equipment, scorch marks marring the walls, the signs of a struggle, a battle waged and lost. Spread out, Stephen whispered. Look for the lab, any data, samples. They split up, picking their way through the detritus of destruction. Stephen's light played over the debris, his heart hammering in his ears. Something had gone very wrong here. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a computer terminal still active tucked in an alcove. He rushed over, tapping at the keys. The screen flared to life, bathing his face in a sickly glow. Dr. Zarek's face filled the screen, gaunt and haunted. He spoke in fevered bursts, his eyes wild. The counter-agent is ready, but the virus it calls to me whispers in my dreams such potential to reshape life itself, to transcend the limits of flesh. The entries grew more erratic, more unhinged. Zarek's face twisted, warped, his features melting, reforming, the virus taking hold. I am its instrument, its avatar. I will spread its glorious gospel to the stars. None shall be spared its embrace. The final log cut off in a burst of static. Stephen recoiled, his stomach churning. Zarek had succumbed just like the others. The counter-agent was their only hope. A scream pierced the air. Finn. Stephen sprinted toward the sound, his heart in his throat. He burst into a cavernous chamber and froze, horror stealing his breath. A creature shambled toward Finn, a grotesque fusion of Romulan and something else. Flesh sloughed from its frame, revealing pulsing, writhing biomass beneath. Viscous fluids dripped from gaping maws, sizzling on the metal floor. Zarek's final experiment, a monster of his own making. Jack charged from the shadows, a jagged shard of metal in his hands. He drove it into the creature's back, twisting savagely. It howled, whirling on him with impossible speed. Claws raked across Jack's chest, parting flesh and bone. He crumpled, blood pooling beneath him. Stephen and Finn poured fire into the beast, driving it back. It thrashed and writhed, screeching in agony. Stephen leapt forward, slamming the door controls. The chamber sealed, the monster trapped within. "Incinerate it," Stephen snarled. Finn nodded, fingers flying over the control panel. A white-hot inferno erupted in the chamber, consuming the creature in cleansing flame. Its death screams echoed long after the fire died. Stephen cradled Jack's broken body, tears stinging his eyes. The engineer's breathing was shallow, his eyes glassy. "The counter-agent," Jack rasped. "Find it, stop this, no matter what it takes." His words trailed off, his eyes fluttering shut. Stephen bowed his head, grief and rage twisting in his gut. He stood, his resolve hardening to a cold, implacable fury. He would find the cure, he would burn the virus from the stars. No matter the cost. Amid the ruins of Dr. Zarek's laboratory, Stephen, Finn and Tharox scoured the debris for the counter-agent, their hearts heavy with the weight of Jack's sacrifice. Shattered glass crunched beneath their boots, the acrid stench of chemicals and charred flesh hanging in the air. Hours ticked by, hope dwindling with each fruitless search. But then a glint of light caught Stephen's eye. He reached into a twisted mass of metal, his fingers closing around a small, miraculously intact vial. The liquid within glowed a luminous blue, pulsing with promise. Finn and Tharox gathered around, their faces etched with a mix of relief and trepidation. They had the key to stopping the virus, but at what cost? A sudden chirp from their comms shattered the moment. Stephen activated the link, Juno's holographic form flickering to life. The Romulan's face was gaunt, his eyes haunted. Stephen's grip tightened on the vial. "We have the counter-agent, Juno. We can stop this." "No," Juno shook his head. "You must bring it here to Romulus. Our scientists, they can mass-produce a cure. It's our only hope." Stephen hesitated, torn between his duty to Earth and the realization that the virus threatened the entire galaxy. He glanced at Finn and Tharox, seeing the same conflict in their eyes. "All right," Stephen said at last. "We're on our way." As they raced back to their ship, Stephen's mind reeled. Trusting Juno, aiding the Romulan, it went against everything he'd fought for. But the virus didn't discriminate. They had to stop it, no matter the cost. Tension simmered aboard the cramped vessel. Tharox, once a prisoner of his own people, struggled with the idea of returning. Finn, still reeling from Jack's death, withdrew into himself, his grief turning to anger. Stephen did his best to hold them together, but the weight of their mission, the sacrifices they'd made, threatened to tear them apart. As Romulus loomed before them, a planet of towering spires and sprawling cities, a chilling transmission came through. The virus had breached the surface. Chaos reigned. Time was running out. Stephen steeled himself, the vial clutched tight in his hand. They had to succeed. The fate of billions hung in the balance. They plunged into the planet's atmosphere, the sky above them darkening with the smoke of a world on fire. Stephen gripped the shuttle controls as they pierced the Romulan atmosphere, the vial of counteragent clutched tightly in his other hand. Through the view screen, the once gleaming capital city sprawled before them, now a twisted ruin. Smoke billowed from shattered buildings, fires raging unchecked. The streets teemed with shambling, infected Romulans, their faces contorted in mindless hunger. Juno, slumped in the seat beside Stephen, his life force ebbing, raised a trembling hand to the console. "There," he rasped, indicating a heavily fortified compound on the city's outskirts. "The last hope." Stephen angled the shuttle toward the compound, its walls bristling with weaponry. Automated defenses tracked their approach, but held their fire as Juno transmitted a weakening recognition code. The shuttle settled onto a landing pad, the compound's massive blast doors grinding open. Armed Romulans rushed forward, their faces gaunt and haunted. They leveled their disruptors at the shuttle, suspicion and desperation warring in their eyes. Stephen stepped out, hands raised, the vial glinting in the wan light. "We have it," he called, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "The counter-agent." "I am Dr. Tanar," she said, her voice strained. "Quickly, bring it inside. Every moment is precious." Stephen and Finn helped Juno from the shuttle, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Tharox supported Liam's unconscious form, his face etched with sorrow and guilt. Inside the compound, a grim scene awaited them. Makeshift cots lined the halls, occupied by the wounded and dying. Scientists hunched over workbenches, their faces drawn with fatigue. The air hung heavy with the stench of sickness and despair. Dr. Tanar led them to a secure laboratory, its equipment battered but functional. She took the vial from Stephen with reverent hands. "With this," she breathed, "we may yet save our world and yours." As the scientists set to work, analyzing the counteragent and beginning the arduous process of synthesis, Stephen and his team collapsed onto benches, their bodies pushed to the brink. Tharox, his face a mask of anguish, turned to Stephen. "I must tell you the truth," he said, his voice heavy with shame. "I was not merely a prisoner. I was Tal Shiar, tasked with overseeing the bioweapon project. The blood of worlds is on my hands." Stephen stared at him, shock and anger warring with the bone-deep exhaustion. "You knew," he growled, "and you said nothing?" Therox bowed his head. "I wanted only to escape, to forget. But now I must face what I've done. I will help distribute the cure, rebuild what I helped destroy. It is the least I can do." The hours crawled by, the scientists working feverishly. Finn paced the halls, his face drawn and eyes haunted. Stephen kept vigil over Liam and Juno, their lives hanging by a thread. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm them, Dr. Tanar burst from the lab, her face alight with triumph. "It is ready," she declared, holding aloft a vial of shimmering liquid. "The cure." But before they could celebrate, a chilling chorus of shrieks echoed from beyond the compound walls. The infected, drawn by the scent of living flesh, were massing for an assault. Stephen and Finn exchanged a grim look, hefting their weapons. Therox and the Romulan survivors took up positions, faces set with determination. The compound shuddered as the horde hurled itself against the barriers, the metal groaning under the onslaught. The defenders opened fire, disruptor bolts searing the air. Wave after wave crashed against the compound, the infected clambering over the bodies of their fallen. Stephen and Finn fought side by side, their weapons growing hot in their hands. In the lab, Dr. Tanar and her team raced to synthesize more of the cure, each precious vial a beacon of hope in the darkness. The battle raged, the stench of death thick in the air. Stephen's muscles burned, his vision blurring with sweat and exhaustion. Beside him, Finn staggered, a gash across his brow leaking crimson. But still they held the line, buying precious seconds for the cure to be replicated. For each vial that was loaded into a distribution device, countless lives across the galaxy hung in the balance. The infected pressed in, a seething tide of corruption. The defenders fell back step by bloody step, their numbers dwindling. The compound's walls shook, the very foundations trembling beneath the assault. In the heart of the complex, Dr. Tanar labored feverishly, her hands a blur as she prepared the final batch of the cure. Beside her, the distribution device hummed with power, ready to deliver salvation to the stars. Stephen and the others fought with the strength of the doomed, their weapons running dry, their armor shattered. They formed a last, desperate ring around the lab, determined to hold to the bitter end. The tide of infected surged forward, howling for blood. Claws raked and teeth flashed, the defenders falling one by one. Stephen's weapon clicked empty, and he grappled with an infected Romulan, its jaws snapping inches from his throat. Finn leapt to his aid, driving his combat knife deep into the creature's skull. They fell back, stumbling over the bodies of the fallen, the infected pressing in from all sides. In that moment, as all seemed lost, Dr. Tanar's voice crackled over the comm, a beacon of hope amidst the carnage. "It is done," she cried, her voice exultant. "The cure is ready, beginning distribution now." With a deep thrumming hum, the distribution device activated, the cure streaming forth in a blinding cascade of light. It shot into the sky, arcing out across the planet, across the very stars themselves. Where the light touched, the infected shuddered and convulsed, the corruption withering and falling away. The tide of horror receded, leaving only the still battered forms of those who had once been lost. Stephen and the survivors stood amidst the ruin, their chests heaving, scarcely daring to believe. The cure spread out across the planet, across the galaxy, a wave of hope and salvation. But even as they watched the horror recede, a new realization settled upon them. The virus was beaten, but the scars it left behind would linger for generations. Worlds lay in ruin, societies shattered, the very fabric of galactic civilization torn asunder. The road ahead would be long and hard, a journey of rebuilding and healing, but they had taken the first crucial step. They had brought hope, where before there had been only despair. Stephen looked to his battered, weary team, to the Romulan survivors who had fought so desperately at their side. In their eyes, he saw the same determination, the same unbreakable will that had carried them through the darkest of trials. Together they would face the challenges to come, Together they would rebuild from the ashes, for in the face of annihilation they had found the strength to endure, to fight, to triumph against all odds. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps in time it could be something better, something stronger, a testament to the indomitable spirit of all those who had stood against the darkness and prevailed. Stephen turned his gaze to the stars, to the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. The battle was won, but the true struggle was only just beginning. As the clamor of battle faded and the last of the infected fell, Dr. Tinar emerged from the lab, her face grim. She gathered Stephen, Finn, and the surviving Romulans, her voice heavy with sorrow as she spoke. "The cure is effective," she said, her eyes downcast, "but there is a terrible price. Those infected, even if cured, will never be the same. Their minds, their very essence, will be forever scarred by this ordeal." A hush fell over the group, the weight of her words sinking in. Tharok stepped forward, his face etched with determination. "Then I will stay," he declared, his voice steady. "I will hold off the infected, buy you time to escape with the cure." Stephen opened his mouth to protest, but Tharok silenced him with a look. "This is my chance," Tharok said, "to make amends, to give my life meaning. Let me do this." Tears stinging his eyes, Stephen clasped Tharok's shoulder. "Your sacrifice will save countless lives," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We won't forget you." As the group made their final preparations, Tharok armed himself, a grim smile on his face. "Go," he urged. "Don't look back." With heavy hearts, Stephen and Finn led the survivors out of the compound, the precious cure secured. Behind them, the sounds of battle erupted once more as Tharok made his final stand. They fought their way through the ruined city, the infected swarming at every turn, but Tharok's sacrifice had bought them the time they needed. They reached their shuttle, the horde nipping at their heels. As they rocketed away from the planet, Stephen and Finn looked back, witnessing Tharok's blaze of glory. He fought like a man possessed, his weapon singing a swan song of defiance. Even as the infected overwhelmed him, he never faltered, his redemption sealed in blood and fire. The journey back to Earth was somber, the weight of their losses heavy on their souls. Jack, Liam, Tharok, their sacrifices had saved humanity, but the cost had been high. Upon their return, Stephen and Finn were hailed as heroes, their actions celebrated across the globe. But even as they stood before cheering crowds, their hearts were heavy, the scars of their ordeal etched deep. In the weeks that followed, a chilling revelation came to light. The virus, though contained, had left an indelible mark on the galaxy. Reports filtered in of cured Romulans, their minds twisted by the ordeal, harboring a seething hatred for their own kind. They blamed the Empire for the catastrophe, their rage simmering beneath the surface. As tensions rose and the fragile peace began to crumble, Stephen and Finn knew their fight was far from over. The scars left by the virus ran deep, the wounds not easily healed. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.